I'm telling you, man, he's in there. Satan himself infiltrated Naughty Dog at some point. I don't know if he's still there. I'm not sure, but he could come back at any moment. No, it's not just a design flaw. It was something else. It's the same issue I dealt with. Literally, the exact same issue I dealt with Jak II, and we all know that game came from hell. So this must be something supernatural. No, man. I, God damn it! No one ever listens to me. I gotta track down Satan. I gotta stop him from invading any other game franchises. Oh my god, what if he paints The Last of Us? I can't let that happen. Fine. I'll do it myself.
Uncharted 1 was a pretty important game when it came out, and 15 years later, it's still alright, if plagued by a few issues. 2 years later, though, Naughty Dog released a much bigger, much more ambitious sequel that many named the best in the series. Is it true that with only a 2-year gap, the studio could have delivered the true masterpiece that many call this game? Or does it fall into the same trappings as its predecessor? Let's find out. The first important thing to address is the presentation. While the graphics are at a pretty similar level of quality, the animations especially have been massively upgraded to be insanely smooth and realistic. The characters all look really lifelike, and it helps bring this more humanistic and sympathetic story to life. Music and visuals are really only improved from Uncharted 1, and the same goes with acting, animations, sound, realism, and atmosphere. A lot of the cinematic flair that made Uncharted feel like a truly next-gen experience at the time comes to life more than ever before in the second entry, really showing Naughty Dog's talent better than any of their previous games had. The main improvement in terms of presentation, though, is the sheer variety of set pieces. From swamps in Borneo to Tibetan mountains, a Nepalese city in civil unrest, and a massive train blazing through miles upon miles of jungle. There are so many amazing, memorable places and battles that take place, all of which help to make each chapter stick out from the others. While the first game has some very memorable parts, a lot of the middle portion totally blends together and doesn't have many standouts. In Uncharted 2, though, pretty much every single chapter is burned into my mind due to how wildly creative everything about them is. Though the first few segments are relatively slow, that's simply to prepare you for some true insanity, which arrives very quickly. As soon as you get to the fight through the war-torn city in Chapter 5, you'll realize why many call this one of the greatest games of all time. Fighting a damn helicopter happens only around an hour into the game, for God's sake. As you slowly discover the secrets of your quest, you're met with truly amazing action scenes around every corner, almost never slowing down at an inappropriate time or ruining your fun with something that's frustrating. You go to so many countries, fight in so many creative places, solve so many cool puzzles, and witness so many interesting cutscenes. Everyone talks about the train segment of this game as the best part of it, and I'd certainly say they're not wrong in doing so. We get multiple chapters on top of the never-ending thing, fighting off an endless stream of powerful enemies as we move from the warm jungle to the bitter, snowy mountaintops. This part is really amazing due to the many different combat encounters that all feel perfectly tailored around the environment of this train. While some other areas in the series looked cool, but didn't have the combat designed around them very well, this one gets it right in both areas. Not to mention, for a while you'll have to dodge these signs strategically while climbing around and across the train and fighting enemies at the same time. There's a lot going on, but the design mixes them together so well that the final result is nothing short of sublime. You also get to shoot down a helicopter with a tank. Yeah, this entire part of the game is insane, and it's placed right in the middle, meaning that Uncharted 2 certainly avoids the big mistake that the first game made by dulling out the second act. Though I ended up pretty frustrated at a few deaths of mine in this part, I wanted to keep trying. It reminded me a lot of Celeste, another truly amazing game that takes place in the mountains, because even though it was tough as nails, it had given me enough of a ramp up along with very fair, masterful design that egged me on to keep trying no matter what. So the game really excels at providing enough build up to these really difficult parts, because you've had more safe, slow environments in which you can test everything out and get the hang of things, allowing the train chapters to be some of my favorites despite dying quite a lot. As I've said before, I don't mind high difficulty. I simply don't like difficulty that stems from poor design or strange spikes in difficulty. But Uncharted 2 definitely doesn't suffer from either of those. The first act is slower, but that's appropriate, and it's still awesome. The second act might actually be my favorite due to the train and really cool puzzles, and the third manages to keep things rolling with some of the most satisfying chapters coming at the tail end of the journey. Once we get into the final set of areas, things really come together perfectly. In fact, they're so fun and beautifully designed that on this playthrough I stayed up until like 1 a.m. just to beat the game. It was that addictive. We fight our way through a village being invaded by the enemies, getting chased by their tank and narrowly escaping death at its hands, and then have a giant shootout jumping from car to car across the snowy terrain trying to dodge missiles and... Oh my god, this game is so freaking awesome, I'm gonna run out of breath just describing it. The game is consistent and has amazing presentation, set pieces, and variety, that's for sure, but is the combat really that great of a foundation? Well, I really enjoyed the gunplay in the first Uncharted, though it was a bit basic and really only found its own spunk when it was about to end. But this game takes one look at its predecessor and says, nah, you're doing it wrong. So many different weapons, all of which work well on totally different enemies depending on their armor, special statuses, distances to the player, and guns. Everything is one constantly moving puzzle piece, and you'll have to keep your balance while fighting off wave after wave of massive threat, desperately clawing at your life. It's so intense, but that's what makes it stand above nearly all other third-person shooters of the time. If I had to use one word to describe the combat, it would be frantic. You don't have many bullets, and though you can find more ammo, you're really forced into changing weapons very commonly, all of which work very differently. But that means you have to switch up tactics just as often as you switch up the tools that you're working with. The signature Uncharted spice that I mentioned in the last review is exactly what defines Uncharted 2's combat, as during parts from the train onward especially, I very rarely had the same weapon for more than around 2 minutes. I always had to adapt to the enemies around me, and that made things very tense, but that's where the real challenge comes from. Most shooters, and the first game in this series for the majority of its duration, require you to basically hide behind cover and shoot, hide behind cover and shoot, move, hide behind cover and shoot, over and over again. You just keep hiding and firing, but in Uncharted, though it is cover-based, you can't just camp behind the same exact wall the whole time, because enemies are way too smart and different for that. There are so many different types of foes that you'll go up against, and their AI will seek to squeeze you out of your cover by any means necessary, meaning you'll have to always be on the move and always be alert. You don't just wait around until you can finally shoot something like in other games, but rather you're required to not let your environment stop you from outsmarting the enemy. The combat in this game is brilliant in every capacity, and it makes these crazy set pieces all the more enjoyable, memorable, and clever. Other than the combat and presentation, there is one more major aspect of this series that I need to dive into: the story. I pretty much brushed the story of the first game off, and though I still maintain that it's a pretty forgettable, basic action story that's fun and pretty much nothing else, the context that the sequel provides for it makes it quite a bit more interesting. Uncharted 2's story is really defined by two things: character development and villains. Two things that either weren't all too spectacular or were totally botched in the last game. In this one though, we get by far the greatest villain in Uncharted history, Lazarevich. This dude is a total menace. He's terrifying, strong, unstoppable, and a real cold-blooded killer. Rather than a forgettable generic bearded guy, we have a Russian war criminal who wants to use the sap from the Tree of Life to become pretty much immortal and a tyrant, and that pretty much makes the story 10 times better than the originals. And speaking of making the story 10 times better than the originals, one of the characters, Harry Flynn, is sort of a villain character, and there's some bickering between Nathan Drake and him, and it is so funny. Take a look.
Hold on. Wait for me. Daddy's got a gun.
I can't believe Lazarevich hasn't killed you yet. It's through here.
I don't think you're gonna get your stomach through there.
Statue of your mom.
Oh look, it's a life-size statue of your ego. You put on weight, buddy. Alright, no more donuts for you.
Dude, we've been through this, okay? I'm cultivating mass.
Stop saying that! You are not cultivating mass, and if you are, stop cultivating and start harvesting!
Truthfully though, what really makes me love the story in Uncharted 2 is the character development. In the first game, it doesn't seem like Nathan Drake was really that developed. He does save Elena at the end, but I always just assumed it was because he wanted to get the treasure. Though, that was just my memory not serving me properly, as by that point he had already learned that the treasure of El Dorado was dangerous, so he really did stop Navarro to save someone else. It was still seemingly out of obligation and not emphasized at all in the game, but looking at what happens to him on Uncharted 2, it provides some interesting build-up, and how it reflects on another character in this game is genius. In this game, Drake eventually learns that the treasure for which he has been through hell and back is not a gemstone, but rather just the sap from the Tree of Life. At that point, he could easily walk out of Shambhala, move on, and be totally safe. But he ends up going after the villain anyway, even though it doesn't necessarily benefit him at all. Why? Well, this is because throughout the game he has learned to be more and more sympathetic to the people around him. He nearly kills himself trying to save the new character of Chloe, but we already know he's willing to help individuals that he cares about, as that was sort of his arc in the first game. What ends up happening that's noteworthy though, is that he's found by someone in the mountains and nursed back to health by a group of kind villagers. He learns true kindness and selflessness, which he ends up displaying in the end by fighting Lazarevich not to save himself, not to save his friend or his love interest, but to save the world. And at the same time, his friend Chloe goes from having no interest in helping anyone if it makes things harder for her, as is shown in Chapter 11 by her lack of sympathy towards Elena's injured friend. But by the end, when Elena is badly injured, she sacrifices a speedy getaway to protect her. These two people learn a lot over the course of the game, and it's extremely touching and well done. This is one of the games that showed Naughty Dog's phenomenal storytelling abilities earlier on, and for me it is without a doubt the ultimate Nathan Drake story. Nothing can top it for me, entirely due to the amazing villain and character growth that just doesn't exist in such a capacity in other games in the series. Note that I haven't begun replaying Uncharted 4 yet, so I might change my mind on that front once I review that, but at least as far as the PS3 trilogy is concerned, this is the best story of them all, no contest. In the end, I adore this game. The cinematic visuals that push the PS3 to a whole nother level, the fantastic set pieces, the tense combat, the mystery of your journey, the intimidating villain, and the really organic character development all add up to create one of the greatest games of the era. One of the greatest games of the genre, and, in all honesty, one of the greatest games of all time. 5 out of 5.